Hello in TV land.
I'm Sebastian Rickerhoff,
And my name is Rowan Wood.
and this is Across the Stars, where if it's Star Wars, we cover it. And
So
today we have
yes,
Yeah.
we do have a special guest today. Joining us is Dr. Mark Wright. And later on, we will be discussing the golden age and just in general Star Wars video games, but specifically the golden age of LucasArts and their wide array of Star Wars playable games. But first, whenever we have a guest on, we ask them, what is their Star Wars origin story? How did they originally get into Star Wars in the first place? So, Dr. Wright, how were you first introduced to the universe of Star Wars?
So actually, unlike J.J. Abrams, I actually started as a Star Trek fan. But then I think it was 1995, was sort of this gradual lead up to the prequels. Lucasfilm re-released the original trilogy without any of these other changes he did, with all remastered on PHX, on these VHS tapes, and they all began with really interesting interviews between George Lucas and the film critic Leonard Maltin. So getting the original trilogy remastered but not retouched is what got me into it. And those are probably real collector's items now because they've really buried those original cuts. But it was starting out, and then the next year, that's when the special editions, you're putting Jabba the Hutt back episode 4 are getting re-released in theaters. And then the year after that, a year or two after that was Phantom Menace. But the problem is, we all kind of went to see that, having, seen all these original movies, and kind of went out and said, what was that? What did I just watch? And so I think I was sort of that last group who came in with just the original films. And then we got to bitch about the prequels for about 10 years.
So the prequels came out, so like, would you say that was your generation of Star Wars?
Yeah, because I was in 8th grade when Phantom Menace came out.
Mm-hmm.
And Revenge of the Sith was 2005. So that would have been my sophomore year of college. So yeah, it was really kind of just across high school. Like the prequel trilogies were coming out.
Mm-hmm.
But that was also the same time, remember, it overlapped with Lord of the Rings, which was the other big trilogy at the time.
Yeah. And Sebastian and I have stated our opinions on the sequel trilogy on the show before, but I mean, we could do an entire episode on this, and we will, but just simply and surely, Dr. Wright, what are your thoughts on Force Awakens, Last Jedi, and Rise of Skywalker, if it can be even summed up in a sentence or two?
I think it's still going to be a while to come up with a good summation of those. For what it was at the time, I thought Force Awakens was good, but it suffers from the same J.J. Abrams movie problem where the closer you look at them, the worse they are. This is true of the Star Trek films as well. I think The Last Jedi, I'll admit it has issues, but I think it was trying to do something new, so I have a lot of esteem for that movie. And couldn't stand Rise of Skywalker. It's just soulless, corporate, trying to please everyone, so ultimately pleasing no one. And it's this weird, maybe it's just because Marvel's already gone through their growing pains with directors of trying to negotiate between their house style and what individual directors kind of want to do with it. And maybe they've just been lucky to get people like Taika Waititi and the Russo brothers. But Disney never quite figured that out when it came to the Star Wars movie. And I don't, same we have with Rogue One, have with Rise of Skywalker, and Solo, also kind of infamously. So I don't know. I think it's good that they kind of take a break, because I think when you compare what Marvel did with what Disney's done with Star Wars, one of them had a lot of planning, maybe less than we kind of imagine, but one seemed to have none. I sometimes see stuff on the internet where people are like, Disney's going to completely just ignore the sequel trilogy and kind of start off from scratch. And, when you start to read it, it devolved into this kind of like particular abrasive critic of The Last Jedi, with but they got to get rid of Kathleen Kennedy and all these other female characters. And I think at this time I'm just going to move on to the sequel trilogy, because I just remember The Last Jedi discourse got so toxic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's true. So to move on, again, we could talk for hours upon hours on the sequel trilogy, which we will eventually. But for now, yes, exactly, yes. And so today's episode's topic, as I mentioned before, is the golden age of Star Wars video games. Now, personally, I will not be talking as much in this episode because I am relatively new to the world of video games, so I am not as qualified or at all qualified to discuss the mechanics and stuff of video games. So I think, Sebastian, I should just bestow my talking powers on you for now, because I feel like you would have a more fitting introduction for this than I ever could.
Well, I suppose I don't really know what we need in terms of an introduction here, but I believe it was I forgot your name again. I'm so sorry.
I just Dr. Wright.
All right. Yeah, that's right. Dr. Wright, I think probably has a better idea than I do, because he was actually around for the golden age that we're going to talk about. But even years later, you still see, you still hear about this golden age where LucasArts was like pumping out quality games, right? I've had the joy of getting to play a couple of them myself. Like when quarantine first started, I spent a bunch of time playing the Dark Forces and Jedi Knight games. And that was like what I spent most of my days doing when quarantine started. But I think I'm really excited to hear about sort of like what it was like to consistently get out, what were generally reviewed as like really great Star Wars games, because you also had like the X-Wing games, you had Knights of the Old Republic, you had all these other ones. Meanwhile, in this day and age, we have Fallen Order, we have Battlefront 2, but they, Star Wars games don't come out very often nowadays, and I feel like there's a lot less like looking forward to them as one would expect.
Yeah, because a lot of the stuff now is sort of the cheap tie-ins, like Angry Birds, Star Wars, or they're doing a pack with The Sims 4 with a bunch of Star Wars stuff they're putting in, because EA, Electronic Arts, has the license now. But it was probably about 12 years, from like 92 when LucasArts got the Star Wars license, to maybe like 2005 with the last Jedi Knight games, where it was just pretty consistent quality all the time. And I think some bad ones. Have any of you ever heard of this game called Star Wars Masters of Terrascati?
Yes, I did hear. That's the fighting game? Yeah.
Yeah, it's sort of like, what if you did Tekken but Star Wars? There's this weird offhand reference to it in Solo that Amelia Clark's character talks about. But the weirdest thing about it is it's supposed to be this unarmed fighting style, and yet half the characters in it are armed. Luke's got his lightsaber, Han Solo's got his blaster. But LucasArts, actually, as a company, goes back. In 1979, now that Star Wars has made it big, George Lucas started spinning off other companies. He already had Industrial Light and Magic from making Star Wars and Skywalker Sound. But in 79, he made something called the Lucasfilms Game Group. And there were two divisions. There was a games group, and in 1982, that became LucasArts. And there was a graphics group, and they eventually split off. The graphics group became Pixar. And now Disney owns all of it.
Mm-hmm.
So during the 1980s, all these other software companies like Atari and stuff, they had the Star Wars license, but most of them are just doing games that are with the technology of the time. They're just trying to replicate different moments from the film, like the Death Star trench run, fighting TIE fighters, the Battle of Hoth, stuff like that. So it wasn't until 92 that LucasArts now has the Star Wars license. Because until then, they were mostly making adventure games, a lot of classic adventure games like Maniac Mansion, the Monkey Island series, Day of the Tentacle, Full Throttle, Sam and Max, Fate of Atlantis, which is like the best Indiana Jones movie outside of the original trilogy, even though it's a game. And the last one they did was called Big Fandango in 2002, which is a really fantastic game. And a lot of these, luckily, you can still get, like Steam and good old games and stuff like that. But they'd also make things. One was called the Scum Engine, which was a script editor for adventure games, using sort of a verb object kind of set. And then, and this is important for the Star Wars games, something called the iMuse engine. And the way that iMuse worked is that it would try to key the track to what was happening in the story on screen. So it's like a dangerous moment, the track would shift some kind of like dangerous suspenseful music. What this is so much easier to illustrate in a Star Wars game because it basically means you have this massive John Williams file where the Star Wars track that you're familiar with dynamically change based on what's happening in the game. It's not the Dark Forces too. Mm-hmm. And so they removed that from all these Star Wars games. But the first ones they did, what I think really separates the LucasArts ones from even the ones that they make now, for the most part, or these old arcade ones, is that they're trying to tell original stories. It's sort of like the expanded universe novels that were coming out at the same time. So you might have Luke Skywalker makes an appearance or Darth Vader's there, but they're not the central characters. And the game story might kind of intersect with the films in some way, but for the most part, they're trying to kind of tell their own story. So like X-Wing, the first one they did, like yeah, it was a Death Star mission, and there's some stuff kind of reflecting that. But for the most part, it's kind of like filling in what else is going on while Luke is having his adventure in Episode 4. And the other games they had done, besides adventure games, were these sort of World War I and World War II kind of fighter pilot sims. So just kind of adapted that to Deep Space with the Star Wars stuff, and that's how you got X-Wing and then TIE Fighter the next year. Which is, I asked my friend Kevin at my age, he teaches English at Howard University, and I asked him, we played all the same games when we were kids, often together. Which one do you remember best and most fondly? And it's TIE Fighter, because it's such a good game. It's much harder because TIE Fighters don't have shields. Mm-hmm. But what makes it interesting is if you look at stories like now, like Battlefront 2, where you start playing as an Imperial, but it's always the Imperial who sees, wait a second. It's like that moment in one of those Edgar Wright movies where the guy goes, wait, are we the bad guys? And then they join the rebellion. But in TIE Fighter, no. You're a hardcore Imperial. You join a cult, like for the Emperor at one point. And you just go very hardcore into it. You're mostly fighting for, not Vader, because that might have been a little too weird, but for Grand Admiral Thrawn, who's kind of been let back into canon now. And so, like, X-Wing kind of covers, like, Episode 4 to right before Hoth, and TIE Fighter covers from Hoth to right before It's a Trap and Return of the Jedi.
Yeah, no,
so that was... Oh, go on.
Yeah, I just want to say that I completely agree with you on the issue with the Battlefront 2 storyline, where I was so disappointed when the main character Iden just all of a sudden switches to the light side, and it was quite a disappointment.
I think, I'm hopeful, I don't know yet, but it kind of sounds like with all the release material for the Squadrons game, which seems to be kind of a return to this X-Wing kind of genre, you have like two parallel stories. There's your You're Rebel and you're Imperial, and I don't think there's going to be like a, at the end the Imperial goes, wait a second, you were right the whole time. So they followed that up with a multiplayer version called X-Wing versus TIE Fighter, which nobody liked. Because this was like 96, 97, and so you didn't have the kind of multiplayer experience you have now. It was mostly centered around like Quake and Doom. So this is even before Counter-Strike. Which was like the thing for most of my high school and college career. And the last one they made was X-Wing Alliance. It was the original story. You were part of this like Corellian shipping family that ends up getting tied to the rebellion because your rival family, unsurprisingly, works for the Empire. And that one sort of covers basically Return of the Jedi. You end up flying the Millennium Falcon at the end against the second Death Star. And it was kind of a real return to form for X-Wing versus TIE Fighter, but that was the last one they ever really did. It was released in parallel at the same time. There's a series of games, the same genre, this like space combat sim called Wing Commander, which also had a very terrible movie starring Freddie Prinze Jr. in the late 90s. And those games were about, you'd play humans fighting these big cat aliens called the Kilrathi. And eventually, in 94, 95, they, instead of having like FMV, so like CG cutscenes, they did full motion videos. They got real actors in against green screens. And they got big name actors like John Rhys Davies was in it, Malcolm McDowell. But who did they get to play the big hero, Commander Blair? Mark Goddamn Hamill. I don't. All of these games, you can't play them without a joystick. So these are ones I couldn't retract. So I don't have one. The one I had was really good, but I don't think it would work with any new computer. But they still sell joysticks, and the nice thing is that these games are still pretty widely available online. The tough thing sometimes when you're talking about old video games is depending on how obscure they are, they might not be really accessible unless you like find a ROM or something like that. For example, the re-release of a bunch of old Mario games on the Switch in October. But if you're like me, you never got a GameCube, I've never been able to play like Mario Sunshine, or a number of GameCube games for that matter. And when you have a company like Nintendo that really sits on their stuff and re-releases it, kind of like Disney with their Evolve, it could be really, there's like chunks of video game history I just don't know.
Yeah, no, I have the same sort of issue with like obviously I was born in 2002, so that I missed out on like a massive chunk of video game history. So now I have to sort of go back and see what I can find, and that's why if you look at my Steam wish list, like half of it is games from like early 2000s and like late 90s or something like that. And it's I also love whenever like they make it more available, as you said, because I think that's it's great to be able to play things that you don't really have the chance to anymore.
Yeah, and I think what's nice for someone your guys' age is that there's a real nostalgia market for people my age who maybe, I don't have a Windows 95 computer anymore, and I don't know how to update the game the way I hope someone else can. So that was the first thing they tried, but there was another kind of more arcadey one. It produced two games. It was called Rebel Assault. And Rebel Assault 1, you play this character called Rookie 1, but it's basically just Episode 4. Mark Rebel's the Death Star. They even reused some footage from Episode 4. I think if you look at a YouTube video for like a long play of it now, it's an hour. But it's on rails, so it's a very predetermined course. You can fly back and forth, shoot some stuff, and that's about it. The second one which actually was when we got our first like kind of decent computer as a family for this one. It's a whole completely original story, but this is when, like with Wing Commander, now they're bringing in live actors, not famous ones, against green screens, to tell this original story about like this secret new TIE fighter with a cloaking device, things that you see a lot in Star Trek but never in Star Wars. Has there ever been a cloaking device in one of the movies?
I know that there was one in an episode of the Clone Wars, but I can't think of one in.
Well, I know
in the action.
I know Darth Maul's ship has a cloaking device.
That's right.
But I don't know if they ever specifically
used.
reference it or it's used in the movie. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I mean, I know some ships have hidden from radar, like Obi-Wan's in Episode 2 and the Falcon in Episode 5. But I don't know how much that has to do with stealth and how much that has to do with actual mechanics of the ship. But
yeah, I think this one. I feel like that stuff is more, at least the one with the Falcon in Episode 5. That's thinking more like submarine movies and submarine combat, which is that's in a lot of sci-fi movies in the '80s. It's the whole climax of Wrath of Khan. Because they're in a nebula, they can't really see or pick up each other, and they're just kind of lurking there. So you mentioned Dark Forces earlier. That's kind of the other one. These are all coming out like 92, 93. And Dark Forces was, what if it was Doom, but Star Wars? And one thing I hadn't realized that... What?
I said that's exactly why I bought it. I had just played like Doom and Wolfenstein. I saw Dark Force, and I said, wow, this looks like Doom, but it's Star Wars.
One thing I didn't know is that, because I think I played Dark Forces before I played Doom, is that you couldn't really look up too much or look down in Doom. Dark Forces is the one that added that into the interface. So you could look around in a more of a 3D area. But what's funny now in retrospect is that the first level of that game is Rogue One. Because that's what you're doing. You're stealing Death Star from.
Yeah.
And then it becomes, this whole other, an original story. It's a good example of where they kind of just intersect with the films. Because, they have those plans that it gets to R2-D2 somehow. And then it just goes off in this whole, dark truth project. And stop and so, and then they made the sequel.
Yeah, I think you can also talk a Katarn, but then even in the Imperial Handbook, it'll reference the Dark Troopers, and like it describes both of the forms of them that you face in the game. And so yeah, it's pretty great.
I'm glad you brought up the expanded universe stuff, though, because I think it's important to know that as all these games are coming out, so are the expanded universe novels. Have either of you read any of those? Like the older ones that are now not canon or whatever?
No, I never did a whole lot of Star Wars reading.
I read a few of them. I have a bunch of them upstairs. My favorite was the Jedi Academy trilogy, basically what I think they took the most from when making the sequel trilogy. Luke, has a bunch of Jedi and an academy, and all the other characters are up to something. But yeah, that was probably... Those are the ones that I remember the most of the Legends books that I read.
Those were the first ones I read, the Jedi Academy trilogy. And I think they have aged the least with me, because the more I have read of Kevin J. Anderson, the less esteem I have for him for a writer. Like, if you go to like a hardcore Dune fan and mention that guy's name, oh, they're going to talk it to. Because that's all he does now, is he does all the Dune sequel, prequel stuff with Frank Herbert's son. And they are not as good. That's the original. Like, even the later Dune books, like when Frank Herbert was getting older, was getting into the 70s, and he starts putting in a lot of his weird ideas about sex into the books, which thankfully George Lucas never really did. Gene Roddenberry never really did with Star Trek. But you just like one of the dumbest characters in those books is Kip Duron, who is a mass murderer, and then everyone just kind of forgives, even though he still has issues. Kylo Ren is much better done.
Yeah.
And then the Sun Crusher, that they
yeah.
have to just like send into a black hole or something. So all of these are coming out. The ones that started were the Heirs of the Empire trilogy with Timothy Zahn, and a lot of those are kind of getting readapted in. Because Ron is the big one out of those books. But the reason I bring that up is one of the other big creations in Heirs of the Empire, which has still not made it back into canon, is Mara Jade. And in Jedi Knight, there's an expansion pack called Mysteries of the Sith, and you're not playing Kyle Katarn. You're playing Mara Jade, trying to find Kyle Katarn. And so the games are really increasingly begin to interact with what the novels are trying to do. Because I wanted to add, I think some of the best Star Wars novels of the old ones were these two guys, Michael Stackpole, I can't remember the other guy, but they just took the X-Wing games and made a book series out of them. It's called X-Wing. I think there's maybe 5 of those, and there's a sister series called Wraith Squadron, which is just, they're more kind of spies who have to fly X-Wing. And they're really good. They're probably some of the better Star Wars books, better written Star Wars books out there. And the other guy whose name I can't remember right now, the one who's not Stackpole, he's also really good about kind of using his novels to kind of fix weird things with the other novels. But some of them haven't aged very well. There's one called The Courtship of Princess Leia, which is trying to tell the story of how Han and Leia ended up together. And the sexual politics of that have not aged well, because what happens, Leia's going to marry this like prince or whatever, so Han buys a planet and kidnaps her and takes her there in hopes that, look, I bought you a new planet because you just got blown up, remember? And of course, the crazy thing is, it works!
Not exactly.
But the funny thing is, one of the big planets in that book is Dathomir. And so the Night Sisters originated in that book and then kind of got reintroduced later on in a less creepy way in that book.
Wow.
So the other reason I bring that up is in the mid-90s, LucasArts came up with this idea that they called Shadows of the Empire, which was, the way they described it is, what if we did all the marketing stuff that you would do for a movie, but there's no movie? Because this is part of like, we've got to like ratchet up the hype until the new ones come out in 99. So Shadows of the Empire, it takes place between Empire and Return of the Jedi, and it's sort of, filling in how do they track down Han, frozen in carbonite, to get to Jabba's palace or whatever. And there was a novel, there was a soundtrack to the novel, which is actually of the whole project the best part. It's by this guy, Joel McNeely. It's really good. You can find it on iTunes. And part of it made it into the game, too. But he composed it explicitly with the book. But it was weird because there was also LucasArts betting big on the N64. There was an N64, it later got ported to PC, but they didn't make a PlayStation game until the aforementioned Masters of Terrascasi fighting game. And the game itself is, the first level is the Battle of Hoth, and it's amazing. And the rest of the game is not great. You play as this guy named Dash Rendar, who is literally just, we need a Han, but we can't use Han, so let's just get a guy who is from his planet, knows him, kind of looks like him, makes the same wisecracks, ship kind of looks the same, who conveniently dies at the end, so we don't have to worry about him showing up anymore. But what they did later is they took the first level of that game that everybody liked, and they turned it into the Rogue Squadron series, which it's I think of it, third person, so you're not in the cockpit like an X-wing, flying around doing different missions between the movies. And that was on Nintendo 64 and on the GameCube. So I actually haven't played the second two in the series because I never got a GameCube. Now you mentioned Knights of the Old Republic. Have you played that?
I played it. I didn't get very far because it was on my brother's computer. And my brother moved off to college, and so I had to stop playing it. But I remember I wasn't a big fan of the gameplay, but I really liked the story. But the gameplay, it's not my cup of tea.
Yeah, because it's sort of, they had done two very technical Dungeons and Dragons games before that, the Baldur's Gate series. And that was on second edition AD&D rules. Like, you guys are probably, even if you played D&D, too young to know what Stocko is and things like that.
Never played
Dungeons and Dragons used to be... Rowan, have you?
Yes, I've played. I was Dungeon Master for a game a while ago that sort of petered out. But I am constantly surrounded by people who love D&D, so I am typically always immersed in some way in the world of Dungeons and Dragons.
It's amazing to me how technical that used to be, and they simplified. I mean, I would, even in grad school, I was hanging out with older guys, and suddenly some guy would come out like, "Is that just a large bag full of 50 dice, Todd, of varying sizes?" Yes, it is. All right. So you're trying to marry that gameplay system, but the much older one, to Star Wars with an adjustment, because it's not even as smooth as like Mass Effect, which is kind of what they did afterwards. So the story behind that was Lucasfilm gave them two options. They said, you guys can do an episode 2 RPG, or you can do something, say, 4,000 years in the past. And they took the second option because it's more creative freedom. Because you could do, like, it looks like Star Wars, and really all they had to do is they got to have everything approved by LucasArts. But they said, like, most of the notes we would get back would be like, just make this head a little bit bigger, or something like that. Like, they don't think they really disapproved anything. And it was sort of the first of like the BioWare 3D formula, which the Mass Effect is where they really developed this. So what does that mean? How do you get side quests and build relationships, romantic and otherwise? You just keep talking to characters on your ship until they like you, and tell you about a side quest or something as you go to these different planets. Now, admittedly, for teenagers playing like Mass Effect, this teaches a very strange way to date women, where it's just like, if I talk to her enough and I do a side quest, she'll date me. It obviously doesn't work that way. And you have the morality system, too, of light side and dark side with different powers. And, of course, the dark side gets cooler powers. But everyone's like, levitation or force lightning. I don't know. But the sequel was by a different company called Obsidian, and they also make a lot of great games. But what's interesting about the sequel is that it tried to go in a direction of, for lack of a better term, like a gray Jedi. Like, they were trying to figure out, is there a way out of this strict dark side, light side dichotomy in the Force? And I think that's something like some of the TV shows especially have tried to kind of play with more, maybe more so than the movies. But this was really, I think, the first and only game to really try to do that. And then BioWare came back for the massively multiplayer online RPG, The Old Republic, which, as far as I know, is still going.
Yeah, it's free on Steam.
Yeah. I think they've kind of looped in a lot of the KOTOR stuff as in a sequel kind of way, but I don't know if it counts as canon anymore. I think Disney just kind of. I don't want to criticize Disney. The novels are getting too crazy. It's good to throw that out, I guess. So as our good bridge here, let's talk about Battlefront. Because it's 2 stages.
Mm-hmm. The only one that I haven't played is the original Battlefront. I played the second. I played the sequel to it. I never played the actual original one. And the one that I like the best, I think, is actually the 2005 Battlefront 2. I think that one is.
I think that is the best one. Because they built on like what went right and wrong in the first one, and then turned out pretty good products. But I think that was one like some of the last big Star Wars games. And certainly kind of original ones, but then it's much more like close movie tie-in kind of stuff. But before you start talking about Electronic Arts, there is the Great Lost Star Wars game that got canceled when Disney bought them, and that's called Star Wars 1313.
Mm-hmm.
Have you guys ever heard of this one?
Yeah, that's that was supposed to take place on Coruscant, right? And you played as Boba Fett, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it was sort of your young Boba Fett in the underworld of Coruscant. I think they had brought on, before it got canceled, if I remember correctly, they had brought on, her name was Amy Hennig, who was famous for working on the Uncharted games for Naughty Dog. I think she left after Uncharted 2 and then went to LucasArts to work on this. But when Disney bought Lucasfilm in 2013, they just canceled everything. And nothing of this game has ever really resurfaced in anything. It would be really kind of, I know they can't do the same time. It would be kind of cool if maybe some stuff comes with The Mandalorian. But it's that's the great what could have been. There's a great book by he used to report for Kotaku. Now he works for Bloomberg. A guy named Jason Schreier, and the book is called Blood, Sweat, and Pixels, and it's the behind-the-scenes story making of a lot of different games. And that's the one chapter in there, a game that didn't come out, but there was a lot of work done on it before everything kind of shut down.
Yeah. I never found out about it until a couple of years after it had, after Disney had bought Lucasfilm. But I kept hearing, and it just seems like such a tragedy because I think everybody just sort of agrees that it had so much potential to be something cool and a great game. But
yeah, and it's. By the mid-2000s, I think kind of the LucasArts golden age in terms of their whole output, not just Star Wars, had really kind of started to peter out. A lot of the big names from the 90s, they had moved on to other companies, like folks like Larry Holland or Tim Schafer. And now it's just a licensing company within the Disney Death Star. That's all it does. So they gave the license to Electronic Arts in 2015 or so, which was terrible because they're a terrible company. They BioWare. They bought BioWare between Mass Effect 1 and Mass Effect 2, and it's I think it's very easy to tell a narrative with the downfall of BioWare, and I think they're really in a nadir of a company right now between the reception of Mass Effect Andromeda and just how shitty Anthem was.
Yeah.
And I think some of it's kind of self-inflicted on BioWare's part, but I don't think EA kind of helps. So one of the things that made it really difficult, that they made, I think, difficult for their developers, was that they wanted to force them all to use something called the DICE engine, which was developed for Battlefield, like Battlefield 1. But what BioWare found to Mass Effect Andromeda, and I think what the people who did Battlefront found, is that engine is not as, I guess, as fungible or transferable to different genres like the Unreal Engine is. Like with the Unreal Engine, the Fortnite, which is how Epic made a lot of their money at first, you can do all sorts of games with the Unreal Engine. You can do Fortnite, obviously. Mass Effect, Jedi Fallen Order is done on the Unreal Engine. So you can do a whole bunch of many different kind of games with it. Whereas DICE can be used for basically Battlefield and Battlefront, but when you try to make an RPG out of it, it became a disaster.
Mm-hmm.
So the first Battlefront, the first new one, was all right. It just looked a lot like the movies. But I'm also a guy who just a multiplayer only game. I'm out. The closest I'm going to get to that is trying this new Avengers game, where I think you kind of have to for the end game. But I'm not. It's not my first choice. Like, I'll play Grand Theft Auto 5, but I'm not going to go to Grand Theft Auto Online because like 3 seconds later, somebody's run me over and is saying a lot of very bad words you shouldn't know because I was a 12-year-old. But one of my students when I taught college, he fought in Iraq. He wouldn't play Call of Duty online because he doesn't want to have some kid call him a noob. But what's he going to do? Like, I think this is real.
No, I'm also like you. I prefer the single player sort of story games, and so I'm kind of curious to hear what you thought of Fallen Order, if you've played it.
I haven't finished it. I played through a good chunk of it, and I like it. I like the way the lightsaber combat works, but it's. I've also played like all the other games it's ripping off, so you can really see the Dark Souls DNA. You can, oh look, it's Uncharted climbing puzzles.
Mm-hmm.
It's that Metroidvania type of thing where I got to go back. I'm going to have this new power, or whatever. But the problem is that instead of giving you like decent collectibles, it's just it's a new poncho. Oh, it's a paint job for my ship. So, for the one thing, I'm a video game completionist. So, like, one thing I did in June was I put in 180 hours to Assassin's Creed Odyssey. And just did everything. Like, not the random daily missions, all the plot missions, side missions, the expansions, and everything. So, I'm just this weird video game completist. Mm-hmm. So, to me, it's kind of refreshing. Where I can be like, hey, it's just a poncho. I don't have to worry about finding that. I'm just going to focus and go through and play with stuff. I think it's an interesting story. I just think that so many crap games for so long, and this one was it was good. Mm-hmm. It wasn't great. It's not like Dark Forces or Jedi Knight, but I would like to see what they could build on it. Mm-hmm. It's like, if you look back now with Mass Effect, like, I don't like playing the original Mass Effect that much anymore. Like, a lot of its stuff, just the gameplay systems and things haven't aged well. But then I see what they took and built up, like Mass Effect 2, which I still love replaying, and Mass Effect 2, they really streamlined this stuff. So I'd like to see what they do. Plus, the company, the people who did Fallen Order, the developers, Respawn, who did Titanfall, they're pretty good. They have a good track record, so I'd like to see what they will do. I'd like to see what they'll do next. It would be, at this point now, I don't know when we're going to get another movie. It would be nice if they just start trying to tell more original stories again, like they did in Fallen Order. And, not try to do the thing that they were doing where if you wanted to get the full story of the sequel trilogy, well, okay, see the movies, and then also read the tie-in novels, and then the comic tie-ins, and then play these games too. And that's also a weird J.J. Abrams thing. He did that with the new Star Trek movies too. There was a 4-issue comic prequel for the first Star Trek movie he did with Eric Bana, where if you didn't read the comics, they're good comics, but if you didn't read them, you don't really get any of the motivation for Eric Bana's character in it. And also, I realize now, they also explain the backstory to the Picard TV show. But who's going to know that? It just seems like this weird way of trying to tell a story where you got to hunt stuff down and You know, but you could only get this one key piece if you went to Target on this one day. I mean, I get why you do that as a capitalist, but
But as someone trying to tell a story, it's not a very great way to do it.
yeah, and the other thing too, I used to have a real head for Star Wars trivia, although someone put online the Dragon Con Star Wars trivia quiz last week with 50 questions, and they're impossible. Like, the only ones I knew were the Jedi Fallen Order ones, and I think there was one about the Mandalorian that I knew. But they're asking stuff like, what's the name of the Gamorrean guard who falls into the Rancor pit, Return of the Jedi? Stuff like that. What's Wedge Antilles' girlfriend's name? Stuff like that. It's like the Emperor Tiberius used to ask these random kind of questions at his dinner parties, like, what song did the sirens sing to Odysseus? Like, the ones that are so obscure that we don't know what possible answers there could be today. Not that I think he really knew either.
Yeah, no. I remember one time I cracked open a Star Wars trivia book just for fun with a friend of mine, and there were some like super obscure things in there, like, oh, who do Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan fight in the year, like, you know, but it was like referencing some like weird planet I'd never heard of, not referencing Phantom Menace, obviously, in the middle of like whatever, and it was weird. One of them I remember was, what is Obi-Wan's height in the Phantom Menace? And I was just trying to figure out how in the world I was supposed to get that.
One of my favorites was, I think it was kind of like 96, 97, so it's so out of date now. It's just like the Star Wars character guide. It was, as a book, but basically, you know, it's Wikipedia, the book. Remember, there was a full, like, 2.5-page biography of the stormtrooper who says, "Look, sir, droid." When people will go into that amount of detail about these things, it's crazy. And I just, but I think one thing that seems kind of lost when people talk about, like, how Snoke was handled in the sequel trilogy is that, you know, for my generation, you know, Palpatine was, until the prequels came out, he had a weird scene in episode 5, and he was in episode 6. And just, that was it. That's all the information you got about him. And so these other authors went out and told other stories about him. And Carl filled in some stuff. And all of that happens well before, you know, episode 1 comes out. Because, of course, that was the other thing where it's like, it's a Phantom Menace, and everyone in the audience has seen the original trilogy. We're like, it's him. He's Darth Sidious. The voice is the same. How did nobody else figure this out? And I don't know how, you know, revisionist history this is, trying to make these movies look better, but I think one thing that Rian Johnson zeroed in on with a comment that Luke makes in The Last Jedi is that I think Lucas is really trying to show, and the Clone Wars actually do a good job of this too, the TV show, that the Jedi in the prequels, as an order, as a group, they're just moribund. They can't detect this incredibly obvious, creepy-looking dude who is clearly grooming this little kid, and I mean that in that kind of negative sense, is a problem. So, to get it back full circle here, there are so many Star Wars games. If you look at list of Star Wars games on Wikipedia, there's dozens I've never heard of. But I tried to kind of focus on some highlights, and it was really great going back just on YouTube and watching videos of some of these old games. Like, I really want to go buy a joystick and play TIE Fighter again at this point. I can play Dark Forces now. I just need a mouse.
There was one more thing I wanted to ask you. Again, just because I'm curious, knowing your sort of your stance on old games versus the newer games. I was kind of curious as to what you thought about The Force Unleashed, if you've ever played it, because that came out while LucasArts was still making games, but
0305, yeah.
But it was, yeah.
I keep meaning to try The Force Unleashed. I haven't tried it yet, because my understanding is the first one's pretty good, and the second one they could have skipped.
Mm-hmm.
I wish I could have been this guy at LucasArts, where I could have just been like, a Star Wars fighting game? Yeah, I'll take it. We're good. And just like, with Force Unleashed too, you just sort of like, didn't we say everything we needed to say in Force Unleashed 1? Like, he died at the end. It's a full arc. Why do we need to do this? So I have to get back to you on that, because you reminded me that even putting this list together, I was thinking to myself, yeah, Force Unleashed is probably the biggest one I left off. And it was mostly just because I actually haven't played that one.
I played both of them, and I sort of agree that the second one is very skippable. It's still fun to play, just gameplay-wise, but the story is sort of all over the place. But the first one's pretty fun if you enjoy like a hack and slash with force abilities type thing.
Yeah. No, yeah, I definitely have to check that one out. But yeah, luckily these are all pretty easily available. I think that's like on PlayStation Now, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah.
Have you guys done an episode about the expanded universe novels?
Not specifically yet. Yeah.
So I know we touched upon that today, but boy, there are some there's some wild ones in there. Not even getting into the Yuuzhan Vong War, or whatever those folks were called.
We keep touching on them here and there throughout a couple of episodes, but we've never done like a full episode on any novels yet.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I mean, there are some good ones in there, and there are some bad ones. Real bad. I think the worst one was called The Crystal Star.
And I think the reason why I didn't read too much Star Wars, there was a period where like I read a good couple of Star Wars books. It didn't last very long, and it all ended when I found this one that was just like so bad I couldn't keep going with reading Star Wars. I forget what it was called.
Do you remember? I guess there were ones that were taking place in the far future, so it's like some descendant of Luke Skywalker who's using like space drugs, and his uncle was the ancestor appeared in the Force Ghost.
Those were comics, and I have them. They're wild and they're crazy, and so Luke's descendant, Cade Skywalker. He's this druggie, and like his father gets killed, and he's like, I renounce the Jedi forever. But then Luke's Force Ghost comes back, and it's like, hey dude, you gotta like get back into it, because there's this Sith Lord. He proclaimed himself Emperor. He's gonna do a lot of crappy stuff if you don't step up. I only read the first two, so I don't really know where the story goes from there. But I'm assuming he steps it up. He either steps it up and defeats Darth Krayt, or he dies. Either one, you know. It was of the two that I read, it seemed pretty entertaining, but I mean, we don't really need that. You know, we don't need a story set so far in the future. I mean, Luke had been dead maybe over 100 years by that point.
Yeah. It's the expanded universe is just this fascinating area, and I kind of miss just how wild it could get, because Disney's not going to allow that to happen again. I think that my understanding is the comics that Marvel's doing now, there's a lot of interesting stuff there, like the Darth Vader series in the comics, and some of that stuff, whereas the novels are kind of just like a lot of the ones that were coming out with the sequel trilogy, they seem to be trying to fill in like these hints, like there was something on Jakku that the Emperor really wanted, and there was something out in the beyond the reach of the galaxy that the Emperor was watching because he thought this might be a dangerous thing. And ultimately, none of that apparently matters in the end. So, again, it's like, look, George Lucas didn't do like a ton of world planning when he made Star Wars. Like there was the world building, yeah, but I don't think he had all 9 sketched out in 1976 or 77. But you just lay enough hints and kind of develop it from there. But this never even developed the hint. Do you guys know what some of Lucas's plans for the sequel trilogy were?
All I know is that he at one point asked Mark Hamill if he would be willing to play Luke in like sort of an older mentor role, but I don't know much about his original plans for the sequel.
If you look at the novelization of Star Wars, the original novelization of Episode 4, which came out in the 70s, which is a fascinating book, because there's some interesting differences in the movie. Nothing like it's not like Obi-Wan doesn't die or something like that, but just like little details that are in there. But it starts off as being framed as an extract from this book called The Journal of the Whills, Whills. And so, from what I understand, these in the sequel trilogy were going to be revealed as these are the guys behind the midichlorians. And and a lot of it was going to happen down at a midichlorian level, so it kind of sounds like Fantastic Voyage meets Star Wars, kind of like or Ant-Man going down to the quantum zone, like that. But that was kind of what Lucas was thinking for these. Basically, got to lean real hard into midichlorians and try to get, it just kind of sounded like, you guys thought that was stupid? All right, I'm going to double down on that. It's going to be all midichlorians. What you guys think now?
They sort of hinted at the Whills in Rogue One, because Chirrut Imwe, Donnie Yen's character, was one of the guardians of the Whills, but they didn't elaborate on that at all in anything. So I mean they're still acknowledging it, but and I think there was a reference in the Clone Wars somewhere, but it just seems like something that Disney's trying to sweep under the rug, because I think even they might think that midichlorians are stupid, and they want people to just forget about them.
Oh, but then their response is they just make up stuff like force healing powers. Now I will say, to their credit, they somewhat planned that out, because they must have told Favreau, hey, we're going to do force healing stuff now. You want to throw something in there, maybe episode 8 or 9 of the Mandalorian, kind of show us how that works. Because Baby Yoda was doing that in November, December. So then when that comes out, they go, oh, well, Baby Yoda can do it. Well, certainly Daisy Ridley can.
Yeah.
Well, again, we can keep on talking about these things.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's so much to talk about, and we're going to have you back at some point, because there's so much that we introduced here that we have to follow up on at some point. Because,
I couldn't agree more. This was a great episode.
It was, yeah.
So I love doing these, so thank you guys for having me.
Of course, yeah, Dr. Wright.
Yes,
thank you for joining us, always. And
definitely more informative episodes for me.
Definitely. So, for Across the Stars, my name is Rowan Wood.
I'm Sebastian Rickerhoff, and this is...
That's you, Dr. Wright?
Across the Stars.
So thank you all for listening or watching, whatever medium you are joining us on. And we will be back next week with another episode. Hey! Bye!